In 1943, the skies above Europe were dominated by death. Each morning as dawn broke over England, hundreds of American airmen climbed into their B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators. These young men, most still teenagers, hailed from diverse backgrounds. Farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college students from California. They donned heavy flight suits to protect against the bitter cold at 25,000 feet and carried personal items like photographs of loved ones and cherished Lucky Charms. They were well aware of their perilous odds. Before dawn, briefing rooms filled with anxious airmen awaiting instructions. Maps displayed the day's targets: another factory in Germany, an oil refinery, or a railway station. Intelligence officers detailed the expected opposition, including enemy fighter squadrons and flak batteries, along with projected casualties. The men listened intently, their faces showing no emotion, but gripping their coffee cups more firmly. Every morning, hundreds of bombers rode toward German industrial targets. Yet each day saw dozens failing to return. Those who made it back recounted tales of sheer terror. German Messerschmitt, Han-9s and Foch, Wolf 190s swooping down in waves like angry hornets, their cannons firing relentlessly through the bomber formations. Direct assaults targeted the cockpit. Lateral strikes came from the flanks, while rear attacks caught planes off guard. The gunners returned fire with frenzied bursts from their 50 caliber machine guns. Yet, the German pilots were seasoned veterans who fearlessly closed in until faces could be clearly seen through canopies. Some unleashed rockets at the formations, others targeted engines, knowing a well-placed burst could ignite an aircraft. The anti-aircraft fire added another layer of danger. Exploding flak shells painted the sky with lethal black clouds capable of tearing bombers apart. Below, German artillery crews had honed their skills over years of practice. They knew bomber altitudes and speeds intimately and were adept at predicting trajectories. Their shells detonated at precise heights, scattering shrapnel in every direction. A bomber flying steadily on its bombing run presented an easy target. The crew could hear the shrapnel striking the aircraft like hail against a tin roof. Ping, ping, ping. Occasionally, a fragment would slice through the fuselage, narrowly missing a crew member's head. At other times, it struck true. The sky appeared to be their enemy. Every bomber was crewed by 10 individuals, a pilot and co-pilot who sat side by side, battling the aircraft's heavy controls amidst flak and fighter assaults. A navigator bent over maps and instruments, plotting courses and aiming for safe returns, a bombardier lying prone in the nose of the plane, guiding it during the bomb run. Arguably one of the most perilous moments of any mission, a flight engineer who also manned the top turret gun. A radio operator responsible for communication with base and serving as a waist gunner, a ball turret gunner ensconced in his cramped sphere beneath the fuselage, rotating to track enemy fighters attacking from below, 2 waist gunners stationed on either side of the plane's body, firing through open windows at temperatures well below freezing, and finally a tail gunner isolated at the rear, vigilant for any incoming threats. These 10 men collaborated, fought alongside one another, relied on each other's lives, and frequently perished together. When a bomber went down, it typically took all 10 crew members with it. Some managed to parachute out before the plane exploded or disintegrated, only to face capture as prisoners of war if they were fortunate enough. Otherwise, they might have been shot while descending or executed by enraged civilians upon being captured. Most never escaped the wreckage. The casualties were staggering and hard to fathom. In October 1943 alone, during a period known as Black Week, the 8th Air Force lost 148 bombers in just 7 days from October 8th through October 14th, targeting Bremen, Anklam, Marienburg, Münster, and on the final day, Schweinfurt for their second raid. On that singular day, October 14th, 60 B-7s were shot down in combat. Another 17 sustained such severe damage they never flew again. In one day alone, 600 men lost their lives. A single mission was marked by a notorious raid on Schweinfurt. Without fighter escort, bombers ventured deep into German territory. The P-47s and P-30As lacked the necessary range to accompany them throughout their journey. Consequently, the bombers were left vulnerable and exposed. German fighters capitalized on this weakness, launching relentless attacks over several hours each day for an entire week. The raid resulted in the destruction of 148 bombers, which equated to nearly 13% of the attacking force. Approximately 1,500 airmen lost their lives, were injured, went missing, or became prisoners of war. Each one of these individuals represented another family awaiting news that would shatter their hearts. The message was always the same. We regret to inform you. An estimated 500 empty seats at dinner tables back home bore silent witness to this tragedy. Many young men who embarked on these missions never reached their 25th birthdays. This single week alone painted a grim picture of the dangers faced by bomber crews. On average, a crew's expected lifespan was just 11 missions, yet they were required to complete 25 missions before returning home. Do the math. Only about 1 in 4 crews statistically had a chance to survive their entire tour and return safely. Some managed to overcome these odds through exceptional skill or sheer luck. Many others did not fare so well. The empty bunks in the barracks told an unambiguous tale, one that statistics could never fully capture. Each morning, crews would head out to the flight line with determination, but by afternoon, some of those spots on the tarmac remained unfilled as a grim reminder of the perilous nature of their duty. By daybreak, fresh teams had taken over. New faces, new names, and young men who hadn't grasped what seasoned veterans knew, that most wouldn't complete their 25 missions. Personal belongings were hastily packet watches, letters from loved ones, photographs, a teddy bear. One pilot kept his cherished item, while the rest were boxed up and sent back home to families still hopeful and praying, unaware that their son or husband or brother had perished. The list of casualties continued to expand each week. Military leadership realized an urgent solution was necessary. Bombers were being destroyed more quickly than new ones could be manufactured. Factories at home were operating at full capacity, with B-170s rolling off assembly lines hourly. Yet they couldn't replenish losses fast enough. A change had become imperative. However, finding a simple fix proved challenging. Armoring the planes like medieval knights was impractical due to weight constraints. Every ounce on a bomber mattered immensely. These aircraft were already pushing the technological limits of the 1940s. Each Wright Cyclone engine on a B-7 produced an astounding 200 horsepower, but there were limitations. Adding armor meant sacrificing bombs, fuel, or ammunition, which all played crucial roles in survival and mission success. The engineers performed constant calculations. Adding too much weight would prevent the bomber from reaching its operational altitude, making it an easy target for enemy fighters. Moreover, excessive weight would reduce fuel capacity, forcing crews to ditch in the English Channel or crash land in occupied France. Improperly distributed armor could also hinder takeoff with a full bomb load, straining the engines and preventing sufficient lift generation. This might result in the aircraft using up the entire runway without achieving flight. On the other hand, insufficient armor meant that the ongoing tragedy would persist. Every day brought more young lives lost as bombers plummeted to their doom, leaving trails of smoke across European skies. Mission after mission was failing due to formations being shattered by increasingly effective German defenses. Finding the right balance was crucial. There must be an optimal amount and placement of armor that could save lives without impeding the bomber's operational capabilities. Identifying this sweet spot seemed like a straightforward task. Analyze where planes were hit, reinforce those areas, and shield the vulnerable spots. However, even with the nation's top engineers tackling this issue, the solution remained elusive. The team included seasoned pilots who had flown numerous missions and engineers intimately familiar with every detail of the aircraft's construction. They all agreed on one critical point: it was clear which areas needed additional armor. Near Columbia University in Manhattan, within a short distance from the bustling heart of wartime activity, a clandestine assembly of mathematicians and statisticians waged their own form of battle through calculations rather than combat. Known as the Statistical Research Group, SRG, this group comprised some of the most intellectually gifted individuals ever gathered under one roof. With 18 specialists, each an expert in their respective field, they brought unique abilities crucial to the mission. The environment was far from typical academic settings. There was a palpable sense of urgency. Every solution could potentially save lives, while any delay might cost more precious ones. Daily debates over statistical methodologies filled the air with fervor rather than personal disputes. Chalkboards were covered in complex equations that resembled abstract art to outsiders, but served as vital weapons against the enemy for these individuals. Coffee was a constant companion, fueling late night sessions and often leading to impromptu naps right at their desks. This was not an ivory tower detached from reality. It was a battleground where each problem demanded immediate attention, critical, confidential, top secret. Documents were marked secret before being securely stored in safes. Access required clearance for visitors. Information could not be taken out of the premises. Future Nobel laureates collaborated closely with pioneers in statistics. Prominent figures such as Milton Friedman joined as an associate director in 1943 and would later transform economic theory. Harold Hotelling, one of the original three members instrumental in founding the group, was already renowned for his contributions to mathematical statistics. Alan Wallace directed daily research activities and ensured that the work addressed practical military issues. Among these distinguished individuals was a quiet refugee from Austria who narrowly escaped Nazi persecution. This man had a unique perspective, identifying patterns unseen by others and posing questions no one else considered. His name was Abraham Wald. The SRG operated under the Applied Mathematics Panel, funded by the National Defense Research Committee. America mobilized its intellectual resources alongside military efforts to win the war. The group tackled numerous challenges across various branches of military operations, including optimal pursuit paths for torpedoes, quality control measures for rocket fuel, and sequential testing protocols for ammunition. Their work was multifaceted, technically demanding and highly significant. Born on October 3, 1902, in Kolossa, Transylvania, then part of the Kingdom of Hungary, Abraham Wald grew up in a multicultural and multilingual setting. The city, now known as Cluj-Napoca and part of Romania, was home to diverse communities of Hungarians, Romanians, Germans, and Jews. Streets resounded with multiple languages spoken by traders and residents alike. It was an environment rich in cultural diversity. However, what distinguished Wald's family went beyond language and cultural differences. They were devout Orthodox Jews who adhered strictly to the commandments and lived by principles that set them apart from others. One of these commandments involves observing the Sabbath, which spans from Friday evening when the first stars appear until Saturday evening when 3 stars are visible in the sky. During this time, no work is allowed. No writing, traveling, or cooking. And according to the strict interpretation followed by the Wald family, attending school was also prohibited. The Hungarian educational system made no allowances for such religious observance. Classes were held 6 days a week, including Saturdays, and there was no accommodation for students who wished to honor the Sabbath. The government saw no need to make exceptions for religious minorities. This left Wald's parents with an impossible dilemma: either send their son to school on Saturday, thereby violating their deeply held beliefs that defined their family, or keep him at home and educate him themselves. Understanding that homeschooling posed significant risks and uncertainties, they opted for the latter choice. They prioritized their faith over convenience and chose to homeschool Abraham Wald from an early age through his pre-university years. This decision was a considerable gamble. In the early 1900s, without access to modern resources, curricula, or support networks, homeschooling carried significant risks. Many homeschooled children fell far behind their peers academically, and some never caught up. Wald's parents were anything but ordinary, and they ensured their son received an exceptional education. His father and older siblings provided him with a rigorous curriculum that would have been challenging even for students at top institutions. Mathematics quickly revealed young Abraham's natural aptitude and passion. Sciences were taught using whatever resources the family could acquire. Languages were essential in their multilingual city, while philosophy and logic honed his analytical thinking skills. Religious studies upheld their cultural heritage. The education was intense, highly focused, and perfectly suited for a brilliant student like him who absorbed knowledge effortlessly. By the time he reached university age, Wald had not merely matched but far surpassed his peers with conventional schooling. He mastered complex subjects that other students found difficult and developed the ability to learn independently, solve problems without constant guidance, and think critically on his own. These skills turned out to be more valuable than any standard education could offer. In 1923, at the age of 20, Wald enrolled in King Ferdinand University in Cluj to study mathematics. The university immediately recognized his level of preparation. He excelled in all courses and graduated with distinction in 1928. Following this achievement, he made a decision that would profoundly impact his career, moving to Vienna, the intellectual hub of Central Europe, to pursue his doctorate. At the University of Vienna, he studied under Carl Menger, a renowned mathematician who was groundbreaking in his field. Wald earned his PhD in 1931 with a dissertation on geometry that demonstrated exceptional originality. He was 28 years old at the time. His brilliance and creativity were evident as he often spotted connections that others overlooked. Any university in Europe would have been privileged to have him as part of their faculty. Given his talents, multiple institutions should have vied for his services. However, this was Vienna in the 1930s, a period when Europe was heading towards disaster. Anti-Semitism was on the rise across the continent, akin to a dark tide sweeping through. Jewish scholars, regardless of their talent and accomplishments, encountered systematic obstacles to securing academic positions. Universities imposed quotas limiting the number of Jewish faculty members, while departments openly refused to hire Jews. The established academic community viewed Jews as outsiders who posed a threat and were inherently inferior irrespective of their abilities. Despite Wald's doctorate, his brilliance and his potential, he was unable to secure a university position due to systemic discrimination. He repeatedly applied for these positions but was consistently rejected. His work was not the issue, it was his Jewish identity that led to rejection after rejection. Instead of teaching and conducting research at a university, Wald worked as a mathematics tutor for Karl Schlesinger, a wealthy banker. While this provided him with steady employment and reasonable compensation, it was a significant waste of his extraordinary talent. Oskar Morgenstern, who served as the director of the Austrian Institute for Business Cycle Research, acknowledged Wald's exceptional abilities and arranged a position for him at the institute. This was not an act of benevolence, rather it reflected Stern's discerning eye for talent. Wald proceeded to apply his mathematical prowess to economic challenges with the same precision and ingenuity he had previously demonstrated in geometry. He began contributing significantly through research papers and gained recognition within the economics community, yet he remained excluded from traditional academia and its coveted university positions. The situation took a dramatic turn on March 12, 1938, when Nazi Germany annexed Austria in an event that became known as the Anschluss. The day before, German troops had crossed into Austria without encountering any opposition, greeted with cheers by some locals. On March 13th, formal annexation was officially declared, rendering Austria a part of the Greater German Reich. This development posed an existential threat to Austrian Jews, who now faced immediate persecution and systemic disenfranchisement at the hands of the Nazi regime. Jewish professionals were abruptly dismissed from their roles, businesses were confiscated or destroyed, and individuals endured physical assaults in the streets as bystanders watched silently or joined in. Synagogues suffered widespread vandalism during this tumultuous period. The persecution that unfolded over several years in Germany transpired within mere weeks in Austria. Abraham Wald recognized what was looming on the horizon. He comprehended that this situation was not transient but would deteriorate rather than improve, and staying meant risking either death or imprisonment at best. In the summer of 1938, shortly after the Anschluss, he fled Austria for America. He left behind nearly everything: his home, his job, his professional connections. Most painfully, he bid farewell to his parents, siblings, and most of his extended family. Not all could secure visas or find a way out. Someone had to remain. He vowed to send for them when possible and promised to rescue them. But he never saw the majority of them again. Of the 9 relatives who stayed behind in Austria, only one survived. The rest perished in Auschwitz. His parents, siblings, mentors, and loved ones fell victim to the machinery of genocide. Meanwhile, Abraham Wald found refuge in America, where he would endure survivor's guilt for the remainder of his life. In 1938, he was invited by the Cowles Commission for Research in Economics, which at that time was based in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He served there briefly as a research fellow before moving to Columbia University in New York City in September 1938, where he became a Carnegie Corporation Fellow under Harold Hotelling. This would be Wald's professional home until the end of his career. He progressed to become an associate professor and later achieved the rank of full professor. He eventually secured a permanent position within the faculty. After enduring years of discrimination and displacement, he found his rightful place in academia, contributing to teaching, research, and advancing mathematical knowledge. When World War II erupted, America mobilized not only its industries and military forces, but also its intellect. The Statistical Research Group was established at Columbia University on July 4, 1942, with charter members officially recognized that day. It remained active until the end of 1945. A total of 18 researchers worked there, supported by around 30 young women who handled the computing tasks, primarily graduates from Hunter and Vassar colleges. The SRG focused on solving critical issues that could save lives, with one of the most urgent being the bomber problem. Allied bombers were suffering unsustainable losses. The military required guidance on where to add armor for protection. On the surface, the solution appeared straightforward: identify the areas hit by enemy fire and reinforce them accordingly. Engineers meticulously examined hundreds of returning bombers from missions over Europe. They greeted each aircraft upon landing with clipboards and cameras in hand before the crews could even start debriefing. Every bullet hole, piece of shrapnel damage, torn aluminum panel, and damaged system was carefully documented. The dimensions of the holes were measured precisely, their locations recorded accurately, and multiple photographs taken from various angles. Back at headquarters, this data was compiled into comprehensive diagrams. Shadowy outlines of B-7s and B-24s adorned with dots indicating bullet holes or shrapnel marks. After analyzing numerous aircraft, clear patterns began to emerge. These findings held true across various bomb groups, different targets, and multiple missions. The fuselage bore significant damage, riddled with holes from both machine gun fire and cannon shells. Similarly, the wings exhibited substantial wear, especially in areas closest to the fuselage. Control surfaces like ailerons and elevators frequently displayed numerous perforations. Tail sections sustained considerable harm as well. Vertical stabilizers and horizontal stabilizers endured repeated strikes yet remained operational. Engines, by comparison, received relatively minor damage. While there were some hits, they paled in comparison to those on the fuselage and wings. The cockpit area suffered similarly minimal injuries compared to other parts of the aircraft. Fuel systems surprisingly showed less damage than anticipated. Fuel tanks bore fewer marks than expected despite exposure to enemy fire. Engineers meticulously documented their observations. They produced bar charts and diagrams depicting the extent of damage to each section of the aircraft. Fuselage, wings, and tails led in terms of injuries sustained, while engines, cockpits, and fuel systems ranked lower on this scale. The outcome appeared self-evident: add armor to the areas receiving the most hits. Reinforce the fuselage where damage was predominant. strengthen the wings that were frequently damaged by fighter planes, and protect the tail section showing persistent wear. These regions represented the aircraft's weak points, as clearly indicated by the data. Any engineer reviewing these statistics would undoubtedly arrive at the same conclusion. The proposal was then sent to the Statistical Research Group for thorough analysis, a routine process involving verification of the numbers before implementation. Typically, this sequence involved a few days of number crunching followed by approval and production. However, Abraham Wald examined the data and noticed something that escaped everyone else. In a meeting with engineers, military officials, and statisticians from the SRG, diagrams illustrating bomber silhouettes dotted with damage markers were spread out on the table. All present observed the same information and recognized similar patterns, but Wald saw beyond what others perceived. For an extended period, he studied the diagrams closely. He posed queries regarding the data collection methods, the specific aircraft under scrutiny, and the overall approach used in the study. Then, he raised a question that was both straightforward and profound, altering everyone's perspective entirely. It was a query that seemed obvious but had somehow escaped everyone else's notice. Where are the planes with engine damage? The room fell silent as this question lingered in the air. The other individuals present exchanged puzzled glances. What did he mean by that? The data clearly indicated lower levels of engine damage, which was evident from the figures presented. Everyone could see it plainly. However, Wald persisted with his line of inquiry. These diagrams only display information about the planes that returned safely. What about those that didn't return at all? Where were they hit? While others focused on the returning aircraft and their visible damage patterns to identify vulnerabilities, Wald saw a selection bias in the data, a significant oversight that everyone else had overlooked. The survivors represented only a fraction of the total fleet. These were the planes fortunate enough to make it back. These were the aircraft that managed to return despite sustaining damage. But what about those that didn't make it? Where did they get hit? What caused their demise? The engineers were working with a skewed data set without fully recognizing this limitation. They had access only to planes that survived and made it back to England, whereas those lost in action were no longer available for analysis. These aircraft could be found strewn across various parts of Europe, crashed in German fields, burning in French forests, or even sunk in the English Channel and disintegrated at high altitudes. The damage sustained by these planes remained undocumented, as their crews couldn't provide reports on what brought them down. This missing information turned out to be the most critical data. Wald understood a crucial aspect about how this data was gathered. If returning aircraft exhibited heavy damage to their fuselage wings and tail sections, it conveyed something specific. These areas could endure significant harm while still allowing the plane to remain airworthy and return home. A bomber might sustain numerous bullet holes through its body but continue flying. The crew might be in a state of terror, with injured personnel bleeding in the rear, yet the aircraft would remain controllable. The engines would keep operating, and the pilots could still navigate it safely. Damage to the wings, while serious, did not always result in an immediate crash. The wings of a B-7 were immense, featuring numerous spars and ribs, allowing for significant damage before structural failure occurred. This made the aircraft resilient even when struck in those areas. According to the data, these regions could sustain considerable harm without causing immediate loss of the plane. Contrary to initial assumptions that these parts needed extra protection due to vulnerability, it became evident that hits on engines were far less survivable. The reason behind this discrepancy was straightforward, yet disturbing. Planes with engine damage rarely made it back. Those hit in vital areas like the engines often went down. The evidence showed no miraculous immunity for engines. Rather, German fighters and flak targeted the entire aircraft, distributing impacts randomly across its surface. Despite being large, visible targets, engines were not inherently more protected or harder to hit. Why then did returning planes display minimal engine damage? The sobering reality was that bombers struck in their engines seldom returned. Engine hits could ignite high-octane fuel and spark uncontrollable fires, leading to swift destruction of the aircraft. The engine disintegrated, with fragments potentially damaging the wing or igniting further fires. Alternatively, the impact might have obliterated the engine completely, halting it instantly. If only one engine failed and was near home base, the pilot might manage to return safely. However, if both engines on a single wing were lost, the aircraft became unmanageable and would roll uncontrollably before crashing into the ground. The same principles applied to the cockpit area, despite its prominent position at the front of the bomber, which made it an attractive target for head-on fighter attacks. Few returning planes displayed significant damage in this region. This wasn't due to a lack of size or protection. Instead, fighters often targeted the pilots directly because killing the crew responsible for controlling the aircraft was their primary objective. So why did so many returning bombers have minimal cockpit damage? The answer lies in the fact that when the cockpit took a direct hit and bullets killed or severely wounded the pilot and co-pilot, rendering them incapable of flying, the plane would not return. It would crash, killing the crew on board. Similarly, the fuel systems followed this pattern. Each bomber was equipped with numerous fuel tanks containing hundreds of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel. A single tracer round, incendiary shell, or hot shrapnel striking a fuel tank could instantly transform the entire aircraft into a blazing inferno. The term used by crews was cooking off. This phenomenon involved the plane igniting suddenly as flames rapidly spread through the fuel vapor. If they were fortunate, the crew had mere seconds to evacuate. Unfortunately, most did not have such luck, resulting in many aircraft either burning up over Germany or crashing into the English Channel after sustaining severe damage. The fact that engines appeared undamaged on planes that returned to England didn't prove their safety. It merely indicated that engine damage was usually fatal. Similarly, the lack of cockpit destruction on surviving planes did not suggest robust protection. It meant that such damage typically led to crew fatalities and plane loss. Likewise, intact fuel systems on returning aircraft did not indicate secure tanks. Instead, it showed that damaged fuel systems often caused catastrophic fires. Wald's analysis uncovered a significant statistical concept later referred to as survivorship bias. When examining only the survivors, one misses critical information about failures, casualties, and those who didn't survive. These missing cases frequently contain vital lessons because their absence is systematic rather than random, directly related to what you're trying to understand. The implications extended beyond bomber armor to influence data analysis across various fields. Each time data is collected, it's essential to question how the selection process determined which data points were visible and why certain observations are absent. The data available is shaped by survival, success, or any other filtering mechanism that eliminated failures, and understanding this filtration process provides crucial insights. His conclusion was both striking and unexpected. The evidence indicated that armor should not be added to areas where returning planes showed the most damage. Instead, it should be placed on the least damaged sections, the engines, cockpit, fuel systems, and other critical areas essential for a plane's survival. If an aircraft could endure hits to its fuselage and still return safely, then the fuselage wasn't the primary weak point. Conversely, if planes hit in their engines did not come back, those were indeed the most vulnerable spots. This finding ran counter to common assumptions based on observable data. Wald's analysis was correct. Had his advice been ignored, engineers would have made a grave error by reinforcing areas that could already withstand damage while leaving crucial components unprotected. The result would have been heavier bombers with less capacity for fuel and bombs, offering no real safety improvement. More crew members would likely have lost their lives due to this oversight. All of this was the consequence of failing to consider the missing data Wald authored 8 technical reports for the ASRG examining damage patterns on aircraft. These were not straightforward documents, but deeply analytical ones filled with equations and statistical proofs. He devised methods using only survivor data to estimate overall damage distribution, including that inflicted upon down planes. This necessitated advanced statistical techniques to infer unbiased results from skewed information. During the war, his documents were classified due to security concerns, as it was crucial that adversaries remained unaware of how American operational research enhanced bomber survivability, even after the conflict had concluded. These papers stayed under classification for many years before being declassified in the late 1970s. In 1980, the Center for Naval Analysis released Wald's comprehensive wartime memorandum, allowing researchers to study the original work extensively. The Statistical Research Group SRG adhered to a distinct policy that influenced how Wald conveyed his results. The analysts at SRG were not military leaders. Their role was to scrutinize data and respond to queries posed by those in command. They did not issue direct military recommendations on implementation strategies. Instead, they provided statistical analysis and highlighted the implications of the findings without dictating specific actions. The ultimate decision-making authority lay with military officers who had a thorough understanding of aircraft design, production limitations, and operational necessities. Despite this, Wald's memorandum clearly outlined the analytical insights derived from his methods. His approach became widely adopted by the military throughout the remainder of World War II and later established as standard practice in military operations research for decades. Wald's teachings emphasize questioning your sample selection, pondering missing data, and reflecting on what remains unseen, and inquire about why certain information is accessible while other details are not. His research played a crucial role during the Korean War when there was a need to assess armor for new aircraft. It also proved invaluable during the Vietnam War as helicopter survivability became paramount. The methods were employed each time the military needed to determine how best to safeguard aircraft, vehicles, or personnel. Wald's techniques were taught at various military academies and war colleges, where officers learned to approach problems with a similar mindset, recognizing not only the visible data but also the hidden insights obscured by survivorship bias. His influence extended beyond the realm of bomber armor. He introduced one of the most significant concepts in both statistics and critical thinking: survivorship bias. This refers to the systematic error that arises when analyzing only successes or survivors while overlooking failures. Often, this overlooked information is the most crucial. The implications of Wald's insight extend well beyond military contexts. In business environments, we tend to study successful companies and analyze winning strategies through case studies. However, we seldom delve into the thousands of firms that attempted similar tactics but failed, filing for bankruptcy or closing their doors without leaving a trace. Consequently, our understanding is skewed by incomplete data. Similarly, in medical research, clinical studies can suffer from survivorship bias if they only include patients who survive long enough to reach the hospital, thereby neglecting those with more severe conditions who succumbed before arriving at the facility. This can lead to an underestimation of how dangerous certain conditions are and incorrect assumptions about which treatments are most effective. In finance, mutual funds that shut down due to poor performance vanish from historical records. When assessing average returns for mutual funds, you only see the ones that have endured. The unsuccessful ones aren't included in the data. This exaggerates performance metrics and can mislead investors. Abraham Wald taught us to ask tough questions. What am I overlooking? Which information is missing? Which failures am I disregarding simply because they are not part of the count? To answer these, we must envision what isn't present. We need to think about what's invisible. We should recall that a lack of evidence does not equate to proof that something doesn't exist. This requires a dual perspective, observing what is visible and simultaneously imagining what is absent. You must analyze both the available data and the missing pieces. Most individuals find this difficult naturally, but Wald was an exception. Following the war, he continued his pioneering work at Columbia University. By then, he was widely acknowledged as one of America's top statisticians. His wartime contributions demonstrated how powerful mathematical reasoning can be when applied to practical issues. In 1947, he released Do Sequential Analysis, a book that revolutionized the field of statistics. This publication stemmed directly from his wartime research efforts. Initially, the methodology was classified due to its military applications. However, once the war concluded, Wald refined and expanded upon his initial ideas, developing them into a comprehensive theoretical framework. The book was published by John Wiley & Sons in New York and Chapman & Hall in London, and had a profound impact on how scientists and engineers designed experiments and made decisions. Traditionally, statistical methods required researchers to determine their sample size beforehand. They would test exactly 100 subjects or measure precisely 1,000 parts, and then analyze all the data at once. This approach often led to wasted resources. Sometimes a reliable conclusion could be reached with much less data, but traditional methods compelled individuals to collect the entire predetermined sample nonetheless. Wald demonstrated how one could make accurate decisions using minimal data by continuously analyzing incoming results. Researchers could halt data collection when they had sufficient evidence to draw confident conclusions. This not only saved time and money but also conserved materials. In medical trials, it accelerated the identification of effective treatments and expedited the cessation of harmful ones, potentially saving lives. The methodology Wald developed became standard practice across numerous disciplines, including clinical trials for new drugs, quality control in manufacturing, and industrial testing of materials. Anywhere decisions needed to be made under conditions of uncertainty where data collection costs were significant. Wald's sequential analysis transformed the way work was conducted. By 1950, Abraham Wald had established himself as one of the world's most respected statisticians. He not only revolutionized multiple fields, but also trained a generation of students who would continue to advance his methodologies. He demonstrated that rigorous mathematical reasoning could address practical challenges and save lives. That year, the Indian government extended an invitation to him for a lecture on statistics. Wald had planned to speak at the Indian Science Congress in Bangalore and visit the Indian Statistical Institute in Kolkata. He arrived in India with his wife Lucille in November 1950. The two children, Betty and Robert, stayed behind in the United States. The trip was set to last several months, and Wald anticipated returning to Columbia by mid-February. On December 13, 1950, Wald and his wife boarded an Air India flight Douglas C-47 registration VTCFK for a routine commercial journey from Bombay to Trivandrum via Madras. However, tragedy struck when the plane encountered difficulties over southern India near Kotagiri in the Nilgiri Mountains due to navigational errors. The pilots failed to recognize the terrain until it was too late, leading the aircraft to crash into a rocky valley below Rangwami Peak, approximately 8 miles from Kotagiri at an elevation of around 6,000 feet. All 21 individuals on board perished immediately, 17 passengers and 4 crew members. The wreckage remained undiscovered for a week due to the challenging terrain, making it impossible to remove the bodies, which were buried at the crash site. Abraham Wald was 48 years old when he died. The mathematical community was profoundly affected by this loss. Leading journals around the globe published obituaries in his honor. His colleague Oscar Morgenstern penned a tribute in Econometrica. The Indian Statistical Institute organized a memorial service. Columbia University mourned the passing of one of its most brilliant minds. However, his legacy endured and continued to thrive. During World War II, Wald's papers had an enduring impact on military strategy for many years to come. Whenever the armed forces needed guidance on armoring vehicles or aircraft, they turned to his work. His methodologies were extensively taught at military academies and war colleges. The concept of survivorship bias that he pioneered became a cornerstone in statistics, decision-making theory and critical thinking. It is now a standard part of education in statistics, business schools, medical training, and social sciences. People everywhere need to comprehend the potential biases introduced by incomplete samples. Even today, over 70 years after Wald's groundbreaking analysis, survivorship bias shapes our understanding of success and failure across various fields. When examining successful entities, it is crucial to consider those that failed but are no longer visible. Similarly, when analyzing survivors, one must also contemplate the fate of non-survivors. When interpreting data, it is imperative to question what information may be missing. In business contexts, survivorship bias can create a misleading image of effective strategies. We often study successful companies and their strategic decisions, learning from CEOs who took calculated risks and achieved significant success. Yet for every CEO whose risk-taking led to substantial gains, there were many more whose similar actions resulted in financial ruin. Those former CEOs don't pen memoirs or deliver speeches. Their companies no longer exist. They are like planes that vanished without a trace. Because we focus solely on the successful cases, we assume their strategies must be effective, oblivious to the fact that survivorship bias masks all the failures. In medical research, clinical trials that only include patients who made it to the hospital overlook the most critical cases. Individuals who succumbed before reaching medical care are not part of the dataset. This results in a systematic underestimation of how severe conditions truly are and leads to incorrect conclusions about which treatments are most effective. Hospital-centric studies deal exclusively with survivors, just as financial analysts studying mutual funds often fail to account for those that have closed due to poor performance. When assessing average fund returns, only the enduring ones remain visible, the less successful ones vanish from historical records. This skews performance metrics by an estimated 1 to 2% annually. Over several decades, this discrepancy can significantly impact retirement savings. Each success story conceals numerous hidden failures. Every survivor embodies many who did not make it. The data points we see coexist with countless others that remain unseen. Wald's teachings extend far beyond the realm of bomber armor. He emphasized questioning our samples, inquiring whether what we observe is truly representative or biased, considering selection biases, and pondering the processes behind the data we have access to and what they might be obscuring. In 1943, young airmen climbed into bombers every morning with no guarantee of seeing another sunrise. The military observed bullet holes and perceived straightforward solutions. They noticed damage to fuselages, wings, and tails, which appeared self-evident. The information seemed unambiguous, leading them to draw an apparent conclusion they were about to reinforce the wrong areas of their aircraft. However, Abraham Wald examined the same data with a different perspective. He visualized the planes that had not returned. He noticed the absence of bullet holes on certain critical parts. He recognized an invisible truth that was right before everyone's eyes but went unnoticed. He posed a question nobody else considered: where are the aircraft with engine damage? Why aren't they here? What does their non-presence reveal? It wasn't magic, it was meticulous reasoning, rigorous mathematics applied creatively and insightfully. It required challenging widely accepted assumptions without hesitation. By looking beyond the obvious facts, by questioning what others took for granted, and by focusing on what was missing rather than just analyzing what was visible, Wald's insights significantly contributed to protecting American airmen in hazardous missions, not through advanced weaponry or improved tactics, but through clear thinking and asking the right questions. This is Abraham Wald's enduring legacy. His legacy extends far beyond his exceptional mathematical abilities and pioneering work in statistics and operational research. What truly sets him apart is his ability to identify unseen patterns and insights. He taught us that often the most crucial information lies in what we cannot measure or observe. Moreover, he demonstrated that some of life's greatest lessons stem from failures that are lost to time. Amidst a gathering of brilliant thinkers, Abraham Wald was uniquely positioned to pose questions others hadn't considered. His extraordinary vision enabled him to look beyond surface-level data and uncover hidden truths. As a mathematician, his unique perspective allowed him to see what everyone else overlooked. Through this singular insight into missing data and survivorship bias, he fundamentally altered our understanding of evidence. He provided us with invaluable tools to prevent systematic reasoning errors. By focusing on the invisible aspects of information, such as the planes that never returned, he taught us to question what isn't there. The bullet holes were evident only on the aircraft that survived their missions. Yet it was the absence of data from those planes lost in battle that held the most profound lesson. Wald's approach to identifying missing evidence continues to safeguard lives decades after his time.